Hey, what's up, nerds? Paul here at Radio Free Hammer Hall. So, I have done some analysis on all of the points changes that we've got in the new General's Handbook. Um, and it's a giant spreadsheet, so I figured that would be kind of boring and uninteresting to look at, might just kind of make people go cross eyed. So, I thought I would just kind of talk about this and go over what, in general, big picture, the points changes look like. And maybe what can we expect from points changes out of the PDF supplements that we're going to be getting. So, just kind of going in order of what was in the GHB. Beasts of Chaos, basically all points down except for some reason, an increase in Razordons, and then Zangor Enlightened on discs. Those went up 20 points or 14%. Which was a pretty standard increase for a lot of these. Basically, most of these changes fall into either a small change, which is, I would say, like 5 to 12%, depending on how big or how many points the thing was to begin with. And then you had your bigger changes, which go up to 20%. And then you had some like wild changes, like the hags went up 50%. And that's just sort of like these special kind of one-off weird things that were just like really wildly wrongly pointed. And virtually all of those are like they're heroes or they're battalions, they're endless spells. They're not really, they're not troops. In general, like the biggest change on troops was 20%. Most of the other changes were very small for units of guys. So, in general, like Beasts of Chaos, across the board, it went down. It had a moderate points decrease overall. Disciples of Zinch, they, I think, reversed a lot of their overshooting on points increases from the last General's Handbook, but they're not huge points changes. The Enlightened were the only things that went up. Everything else went down, and in general, I would say they cluster around a 10% decrease. So if you look at, like a 10% decrease across your whole army, that's like 200 points. And a lot of this stuff is it's not going to be like a 10% decrease across your whole army. So maybe you're going to recoup 50 or 100 points, maybe a little bit more, depending on what's in your list. Everchosen, Varangard went down 20 points. Not really exciting. Nurgle, basically, across the board, was about a 10% decrease on everything. And it was only on a select few things. And I think most of them are not going to be that impactful, although I think, just my personal opinion, and I'm going to have to test it out more, but the Puscoil Blightlords going down to 200, I think, could potentially be a big deal because you tend to not run those in twos. You usually want to run them in bigger units, so functionally, like a unit of them is going down more. What we see in Slaves to Darkness, a whole bunch of chariots can now be taken in units of 3 and have horde discounts for 3. So that was the big thing that we got out of our Chaos Chariots. And then our Marauder Horsemen went down a little bit, 10 points. Not super exciting. So that basically is it for Chaos. Looking at Death. Death had some interesting changes. Here's the weird things that I noticed here. Dire Wolves went up. and they went up 10%, or I'm sorry, 10 points, which on them is 17%. So that is one of the chunkier moves that we see in troops. Your Necromancer went up, Archon went up, Nagash went up 50 points, and although that looks like a lot, it's only 6%. So it was actually kind of a light touch on Nagash, oddly enough, compared, percentage wise to what happened with a lot of other things. 50 points is a big piece of your army in total, but it's not, in comparison to what Nagash was and what these other points changes are, it's one of the smaller ones. Other than that, interestingly enough, across Legions of Nagash, there were a lot of small points decreases, a lot in the lower range of points decreases. Notably, Graveguard went down 20 points and 60 points on the Horde. So I've already heard talk of people wanting to run Graveguard as a replacement for Grimghast Reapers, because the Reapers went up a lot. They went up 20 points for their min-sized unit and 60 points on the Horde. So 14% and 17% respectively. So that's one of the bigger points increases on troops in general in terms of percentage. Other than the Grimghast Reapers, Nighthaunt across the board got decreases, and it was to lots and lots of stuff. And some of them were decently sized. A lot of the heroes went down. One of the big things that I noticed in going through this is a lot of the things that changed are heroes and monsters. They changed a lot. Troops did not change that much. Beastclaw Raiders had a bit of a haircut across the board and two big drops in their battalions. Two of the bigger drops overall were two of their battalions. Unfortunately, because of the way Beastclaw is pointed, first of all, they're getting very small changes, which I thought was very strange, because they're getting 20 points here and there on all of these different things, and percentage-wise, it's like, your Stonehorns and Thundertusks went down 6%. There were 20-point changes, but, to make that a big change and stay in line, they could have actually dropped those like 60 points and been reasonably in line with what a big change would be in this book. So I think Beastclaw is definitely disappointing in that. Maybe they're hoping that by changing the battalion points, people will take the battalions and make up for the rules differences. I don't know if they're actually going to be worth it, though. Some small tweaks, basically, across the board on our Iron Jaws. Most of those were like, 5 or 6% changes. A bunch of 11% changes on the battalions, and Bloodtooths and Iron Suns both went down by a third. So those are really big changes in the battalions. So I think between Beastclaw Raiders and Iron Jaws, I think they're trying to fix those armies by changing their battalion costs. Darkling Covens got some pretty decent changes as well. They're down 10% on Bleak Swords and Dread Spears, and 14% on Blackguard. So here's the interesting thing, and I think our predictive sort of instrument here is Daughters of Cain. Witch Elves were one of the biggest offenders in leading up to these points changes, and they got increased by 20% on their base cost and 11% on their horde cost. So I think that is going to really be indicative of what we can expect for the heavy-handed changes that might come to something like Skaven. I have no idea what they would fix in Flesh Eater Courts, to be totally honest. I feel like that's an errata change that needs to be made. Most of Skaven, I think, can just be fixed with points adjustments. In Daughters, the Hag Queen went up 30 points or 50%. Like, that's a really big change. And between those, that's really taking a lot of points out of your army and makes Daughters of Cain players have to make some hard choices on what they might eliminate out of their army. And then the Canary Heartrenders also went up 13%, another 10 points from 80 to 90. So really our big offensive units or big offenders out of Daughters of Cain got some really big increases. We had some other miscellaneous things here and there that got decreases. We got some 20% decreases on some heroes in the Dispossessed. Warriors went up 10 points. Not overly exciting there. Hammerers went down 20 points each, and you're looking at 13% there. Free Peoples, we got a pretty big change on great swords. They're down 14% for a single unit and 17% on their horde size. So they're clearly really encouraging your big units of great swords, your ground pounding guys. Other noteworthy changes, despite Deepkin doing pretty well in the meta in general, they got a lot of points decreases. Noteworthy, the Soul Scryer went up 50 points, or 63%, so that's kind of a big deal. And Morsar Guard went up 30 points, or 21%. So I apologize. That's actually incorrect what I had said before. The Morsar Guard actually technically got the biggest percentage points increase for a unit. So from 40 to 70 points. So I think our Deepkin Eel lists are really going to be getting hit hard here because they were using the Soul Scryer and the Morsar Guard in combination. So realistically, I think they can probably just cut the Soul Scryers to make up that points difference. Caradron Overlords, they got some pretty hefty points drops. 30 and 40 points on the ships. And 17%, 20 points on the Sky Wardens. So that was a really big one. That I think is going to impact what Caradron Overlords do a lot. Those being 100 points now is going to definitely make a difference. Other than that, moving along, Seraphon got excuse me. Seraphon got a whole bunch of points decreases. Not really anything that exciting. Skinks went up 10 points, which is 17%, which is a fairly sizable increase, but considering that they were like base 60 points to begin with, to get less than a 60% change, less than a 17% change, they were going to have to either change the min unit size or go to 5-point increments of change to actually get them to less of a drastic increase. Stormcast Eternals, mostly decreases across Stormcast Eternals, apart from 20-point increase on evocators, so that's 10%. Sequitors went up 10 points and 40 points in their horde, so that's 8% and 10% respectively. Got some increases on some heroes, a bunch of decreases on heroes. Most of Stormcast, though, we're looking at relatively light changes. Wanderers, they got a decent number of substantial points drops. Wildwood Rangers, Wild Riders, Sisters of the Watch, Sisters of the Thorn, all went down pretty substantially. So that's going to make for some interesting possibilities there. Maybe Wanderers will actually start popping up in the meta now because they got some aggressive points decreases. Overall, there were 180 scrolls, apart from the endless spells from like Malign Sorcery. 180 war scrolls that got changed. Out of those, only 29 were increases. It seems like they are predominantly making points adjustments down. Only 16% of the points changes were increases. And most of those are, honestly, they are tweaks mostly to heroes and a couple of offending units. And then you had really like your armies at the top of the meta, Legions of Nagash / Nighthaunt, Daughters of Cain, Ideneth Deepkin all get some pretty big haircuts on their really aggressive units. Otherwise, most of this is pretty benign tweaks and changes. And I'm really not predicting that we're going to get big points changes in Skaven. What I'm really seeing over this is they went very light touch on most of these things. We're looking at, approximately 10% being like a normal points change. And that going up or down a little bit depending on exactly like how many points they are, because they're only moving in 10-point increments, so they kind of have to end up like rounding, so to speak. Is it going to be a 10-point increase or a 20-point increase? Well, a 20-point increase would put us at changing it by 25%. Okay, so then it should probably be a 10-point increase. So overall, I was wondering really if by doing this analysis, if I was going to come up with anything really interesting out of it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, most of this is pretty boring, and the things that really pop out are that the big points increases are sort of one-off things here and there, and the really bad offending things in the top tier armies. So what does that mean for what we've got going on out of the books that are going to get adjusted with these PDF documents coming out? What can we really expect out of, say, adjusting Skaven or Flesh Eater Courts? Those are the ones that people, I think, are more concerned about. My guess is that the Flesh Eater Courts Zombie Dragon is probably going to get a big price hike. Is it going to be more than a 20% price hike? I don't know. And I don't think that even really fixes the problem. Skaven, on the other hand, I think they can adjust a lot of the points and will adjust a lot of the points. I think you're going to see Plague Monks probably go up whatever the equivalent of 20% is. So I think, let me just break out the calculator real quick. They're currently 70 points for 10. So if they go up 10 points, that would be a 14% increase. So I think we're likely to get our Plague Monks at a 10%, I'm sorry, a 10-point increase for the 10 pack. It's currently at 240 for the Horde. So let me just see real quick. So maybe 280 for the Horde if that was like a 20% price increase. So it'd be increasing it 40 points on the Horde, which would also match with, increasing the whole thing by 10 points per 10. That would make sense. So I think probably if they keep their Horde discount, they would probably go to 280 for the 40. Other big offending things right now, I think the Acolytes, they're a question mark to me because I'm not sure how many people are actually running them, although they are offensively strong. Would they probably get like a 10 point for 5 increase? It's a good chance that you're going to see that, but I don't know that they've popped up enough in competitive play, just because the models are hard to come by and really expensive. Like they're a real investment, or you have to use replacement models, which is what I did. I used models from another non-GW model line to replace them, or people are converting them, and converting things in that quantity can be a pain in the ass. And won't necessarily look that great. And people that want to compete for best overall and want good paint scores, they need to do good conversions too. So those conversions could be a challenge. On our Vermin Lords, a 20% increase on a Vermin Lord Warp Seer would go to like 310. So my anticipation, honestly, is they're probably going to be more like 300. I don't expect them to be much more of a change than that, and I don't know that anything but the Warp Seer is going to see that big of an increase. And I suspect that the Deceiver might actually go down because people really haven't been abusing him. Jezzails are another one that I think is a possible points increase. They're currently 140 for 3, so foreseeably maybe 160. That would be let's see. It'd be like a 14% increase. Possible. Other than that, I'm not sure what like the big offenders really are. And just as somebody that's been playing Skaven, I can see, taking, more than 100 points, sometimes like 200 points out of my list and have it be okay. Screaming Bell, I think, could probably also go up. It probably could go up to as much as 240, but I think 220 is more likely, because that would be a 10% increase, which is pretty standard. I don't know if the Plague Furnace would also go up. It would probably go up to at least 200, I think, because that's also kind of comboing with those Plague Monks and making them extra strong. So this is sort of like the pattern that we're seeing. And our other books that have been released since, whenever the cutoff was, call it January 1st, Fire Slayers, I haven't seen anything that offensive out of them yet. Khorne, not that exciting. So I think there's a big like we'll see on a lot of these. Um, and out of Slanesh, I'm honestly not sure. I feel like Korn, Slanesh, and Fire Slayers are pretty fair. So if you're going to see changes in there, I expect them to be probably changes of like less than 10% on units. They're just probably going to be tweaks. Unless there was something like weird that I'm missing that needs to get fixed. But Slanesh, I think, is fine. Corn is, if anything, Corn could probably use some points decreases because it's not crazy strong. And Fire Slayers maybe adjusting the horde costs on some of their units. But again, I don't think that large points increases are really necessary there, or really points adjustments. So, just sort of in summary, the points changes have been very small out of this GHB. I do have some other points analysis that I am going to share that was a little bit bigger picture on changes since the first General's Handbook on those things that don't have new war scrolls, just for an interesting comparative analysis. But overall, what we're seeing really in this General's Handbook is a fairly small change on most of these things, and some of the changes in these armies, like a good example I think is like Dispossessed. Like their dwarf warriors went up a little bit, but you know a lot of other things went down, so they're probably net down on their list overall, and the warriors just got adjusted because of mixed order soup. um, Whereas a lot of these other things are getting adjusted because of how good they are in faction. Um, the one that I really just want to point out for a second that is a bizarre change to me is the Hellblaster volley gun going up 40 points. I almost wonder if this was a misprint, because that's a 33% increase, and the organ gun is still 120, which was the same as the Hellblaster volley gun. And the organ gun is almost strictly better than the Hellblaster volley gun. And the organ guns fit neatly into that mercenary company, so that you can take, those, and I'm thinking of this from a free guild perspective. You can take 2 organ guns, a gyro bomber, and a gunmaster, and that's your full 400 points on the nose of allies and mercenaries. And so that's giving you rerolls on the guns and +1 to hit from the gyro bomber. Like that seems to me like that would warrant a points increase, but we got the increase on the volley gun instead, which is mathematically worse. Like in terms of like shot output, the organ gun's better. So I I wonder if this was an error in a keystroke, because Hellblaster volley guns are not that good. Like I would have expected volley guns to go down to 100, not go up to 160. So whatever. I think that one, it might be an error. But I think in large part, things that needed to get curbed got curbed. And, I look at something like, for example, Stormcast Eternals, where they did get some points increases on a couple of offending things, but so much other stuff that you take in the army went down. So it's like, I don't know if their net change actually changes their list. I think it basically stays the same. It's just points in a different place. And oh, you can't stack, 4 ballistas and 10 evocators with Gabriel Sherhart and a whole bunch of sequitors. Like that kind of makes sense. Like that particular like one list got nerfed, but Stormcast in general, not big changes. It kind of comes out in the wash with a lot of these things. So overall, what does this mean? That we have a lot of points decreases? It means more stuff's going on the board, more endless spells. Excuse me. Just generally more stuff in the game. And I think that is a trend that has been going since early in Age of Sigmar, that 2,000 points now, I think, is worth a lot more stuff than 2,000 points 4 years ago. And I don't know what that even means. Like, I don't want to start dropping discussion of things like power creep around, but well, that's for my next video, discussing power creep. Anyway, that is just kind of my analysis on all of these points changes. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Likes and subscribes are always welcome, and I will talk to you all later.